And the title of my talk is How to Maintain the High Carbon Sink in Canada's Forests in the Near Future. And I say high is relatively high, maybe from the temporal perspective, it could go down in later. And my talk involved many people listed here in China, in the various parts of the world, but I'm not going to introduce them one by one. And the content of my talk includes the four things. First, I will talk briefly on the carbon in the integrated socio-environmental systems and the impact of China's ecological programs on China's forest carbon cycle. We have quite a lot talk on these already. Potential to increase or maintain China's high carbon sink through afforestation and forest management. And the last one being the role of forest carbon sink in achieving China's carbon neutrality by 2060. And many of you might be aware that China now is engaging on the carbon neutrality activities very seriously, in particular after President Xi Jinping spoke at the 70th United Nations General Assembly. In that, he pledged that China will take more effective policies and measures to decrease CO2 emission by 2030 and achieve carbon neutrality by 2060. Although most Western countries have pledged to reach the carbon neutrality by 2050, but China's goal is 2060. Actually, after these, the whole China is being mobilized. People from all walks of life in China are now involved in this work. Recently, I published a paper in the new international journal called The Innovation. This is by Chinese Academy of Sciences. And in that, I produced this kind of conceptual figure. Since the first industrial revolution with the Watts steam engine, we started to emit carbon to the atmosphere. And this gradually increases. And when we use electrical engines, after we know how to use the Franklin's principle, and then it will increase, in particular with the appearance of computers and then later the internet, the emission of carbon has been increasing dramatically. And some people call these separate industrial revolution. One is by computer, the other is by internet. Some could combine them together. And now there are also some people calling that the renewable energies will be our next industrial revolution. And I really like that idea. And by this, we will dramatically decrease the carbon emission in very short span of time, very short. And this is dotted line. This is, if we want to achieve carbon neutrality, we will have to follow basically this line. But notice that I did not drop all the way to zero because it can be balanced partly by natural ecosystems. And so we don't have to drop all the way to zero. The concept of carbon neutrality is very simple. Currently, we have high emission, little absorption by ecosystems. But with time, we hope we will decrease emission and increase absorption so they can be balanced. This is a very simple concept. And the dynamics in the integrated social environmental systems could be simply represented in this way. We have social systems, which is political, economic, and also social. And we make a lot of decisions, taking a lot of actions. And these could influence the environmental systems, which is physical, biological, and chemical. And in my view, we often that the reality in the environmental system is not sufficiently understood and weakly influences the social system. So in here, I have this imbalanced arrow indicating there is a strong influence of the social system in the environmental system, while the other way is not strong, much weaker. This does not mean the feedback is weak. It's just that the information flow is weak in the opposite way. And this also indicates that we often make decisions without complete understanding of their impacts on the environmental system. And this is why I particularly like today's discussion on the integrated system. In my view, particularly, we need to understand the natural environment first. We need to increase understanding of that. And this is the main purpose of my talk. And the information flows between these two systems are not balanced. So we should understand these environmental system more in order to have better feedback to our decision making. And the carbon in these integrated systems actually is very complicated. It involves almost all sectors of our society. And actually it involves all energy producers and users. So almost everybody in our social systems. And in order to achieve carbon neutrality, we have many options, and these are some of them. On the carbon emission side, we should reduce fossil fuel use by replacing it with renewable energies, and wind, solar, biomass, geothermal, hydrogen, tidal, and so on. And of course, we also need to increase energy use efficiency, including the recycle, reuse, and the carbon capture and the storage. And the storage, and hydropower and nuclear energy, and so on. And of course, there are costs associated with it. And here I just put a very brief estimate, the symbol, whether or not it's cheap to do relative to social cost of carbon. And this is our societal decision. In the USA now, the social cost of carbon is pegged at the $51 US. The Biden administration's guiding value there. But actually, the renewable energies, the cost is coming down. It's near to the social cost of carbon. And on the forest side, on the carbon absorption side, we have forest ecosystems, agro-ecosystem, grassland, coastal ecosystem, and the coastal waters, quite a few things. But I think they are mostly lower cost, at least lower cost. But what's their potential? That's the question. And if we can solve our carbon neutrality issue just by increasing our carbon sink, then it will be a lot cheaper. But so we need to know both the cost and the potential. So this is the focus of my talk today on the China side. And we can have a quick review on the main ecological programs in China. Many of these have been talked about by Professor Song and also An Li and others. And starting late 70s, we have Northern Shelter Program. Northern Shelter Program is to produce windbreaks to reduce the wind erosion. And then in late 80s, we have River Shelter Forest Program at the Yangtze River and the Zhujiang River, and that's the middle and the southern China. And starting 1998, we have Natural Forest Protection Program, and then later Grain for Green Program. Whether it's green, is a grain to green of grain for green, I think it's the same thing. Starting 2001, then Beijing-Tianjin Sand Control Program. This is also very large program and planted a lot of trees. Also grass conservation program. And all these programs resulted in greener China, and China's forest cover has increased considerably. Here is the work by my colleague in China using MODIS data. And you see over the last 20 years, if you see vertically, you can see increase. In the 5 years that you can see is very obvious increase in the forest cover. Here is by percentage. The greenness indicates the percentage. And with that, we also have a way to estimate the forest stand age. The stand age, you can see that a lot of new forestry programs created young stands. These are the very young stand, less than 20 years old, between 10 to 20. A lot, even some of them is younger than 10 years old. And by last 2019, 2 years ago, and the forest age is been shifting, of course, naturally, forest is getting older. You compare these, you see the forest is getting older. And we used remote sensing data, the forest structural, and actually for all ecosystems here, leaf area index, soil, and the daily meteorological data. We calculated the global land sink, spatial temporal distribution over last close to 40 years. So this is published in Nature Communication 2 years ago. And it indicates that, of course, the source and sink fluctuate greatly from year to year, and also spatially. And we can, for each year, we can sum them up and compare with real data. That the blue line here, blue one, this is the Global Carbon Project Office. It is a residual of global carbon sink. We call it residual global land sink. We can take it as a measurement because the whole globe, the carbon has to be balanced. Then our model, the black one, track these quite well. Interannual variability is reasonably well, but the trend, the increasing trend, is quite well captured. And part of that, we take out China's portion. And the China's portion, you see the land sink on this side increases fairly rapidly. In particular, after the ecological program, afforestation effort, and then we start to see the sink is being increasing with time. Of course, we can also compare with inventory data with above ground biomass, which is only a part of that, also seeing the same trend. And there are a lot of estimates on the China's carbon sink. the one we have this year over this period of time. And there are also others, bigger numbers, but for different periods of time. There is one very high number, so we could question these. There are three numbers produced from Nanjing University, where I worked before, and I really lead and participate in this work. And they also have similar work. But although the estimates are quite different, what I would like to emphasize is that the way that we do it for the whole globe consistently, when the whole globe is controlled by the measurement, the China part should be fairly accurate. It will not be more than 30% in error. I think the error, here is giving larger impression than it should be. And the distribution of China's carbon sink from our work is this. You can see that most of these sink occurs in middle-aged forest, in these young and growing forest. But we also understand that there is forest growth dynamic with time. And this is the forest growth curve. Initially, it starts from zero, you reach the maximum, then you will decrease. And this is for several deciduous needle forest, evergreen needle forest, and deciduous broadleaf forest in different regions. You see, they all have similar curves. And this is produced in collaboration with Professor Ji at Nanjing University. And these curves are very similar to what we did before for Canada's boreal forest from growth and yield curve. So this is at a different stance site called the site index. And for the good side, you grow faster, reach the maximum faster, then also decrease faster. For the not so good side, you grow slower. It takes about 70 years to reach to the maximum, for example. And this has a tremendous impact on the carbon source and the sink measured about flux sites. We have 7 flux sites in Flux Lake, Canada previously, and this is the earlier work. And you put them together against the standard age, you see initially it's a source, then become sink, and there is a strong sink in the mid-age forest. And similarly, this is found in USA with 13 sites by Bev Law and their work. But their forests grow much later, close to 80, 90 years, then start to decrease. So this has an implication, the forest standard age has implication. So we did simple modeling by putting in the semi-empirical age curve relative to 1990. You can see it changes smoothly because here it's only age changing. But at the end, there is a big jump. See that there is a difference. You see, and so if we pick out these MPP variation with time for different provinces in China, you don't have to worry about which is which. But in general, they have these trends. Some provinces reach to the peak, maybe 20 years later, then start to decline. Some provinces already start to decline, for example. But overall, the forest is aging. We could not have very much new forest plantations. The forest ages get progressively larger. So this is what a kind of simple estimate. If we don't do anything to China's forest, we expect a sink, it will be decreasing with time in this way. Maybe it's a little bit too dramatic here because we have other positive influence like atmospheric CO2 fertilization, maybe climate change in some places. But this is just an illustration And this is the past estimate. This here is our national carbon emission. You take a ratio, and then here we about 10% right now. And but if we do our best, make our best effort, we could double it, making about 20% of difference. So this is we hope. I'm guessing this is the guess number from the future. We will keep increasing emission until around 30. We're decreasing. So if we want to achieve carbon neutrality, then these two lines will have to meet by the time we get 100% contribution from the sink. And so that here comes my central idea in this presentation is that how we can maintain our current high sink. So there are three questions to answer. What is the potential for afforestation? In other words, how much area that is still available for planting? And China's National Bureau of Forestry said that by 2050, there can be a net increase of forested area about 47 million hectares, compared with 2020, or by the time there will be 26% of China's landmass will be covered by forest. And so there will be about 4% increase from now. And the second question is that how to enhance carbon sink through forest management. And the third, what are the impacts of climate and atmospheric changes on forest carbon sink? Let's deal with the first. The China's forest distribution currently, this is the map. Here, just the green color just means there is forest. The area is 220 million hectares, about half of the Canada's the forest area. The timber volume is 17.6 billion cubic meter, and this is the total carbon stock. In order to find the remaining areas that can be planted, we have first need to consider the water conditions, whether the water conditions are suitable for forest growth. And so this is the water suitability estimate in collaboration with a group of people in Tsinghua University. And in that calculation, actually, this is a fairly large amount of work. We do it at a very high resolution, 30-meter resolution. And we have to consider the topographical effect. For example, those facing slopes are more suitable for tree growth in semi-arid regions. For example, the semi-arid regions, this area, the south-facing slope has much higher potential ET, while north-facing slope has lower potential ET. So water evaporates strongly, trees could not sustain. So we have to consider that slope and aspect. And also the lateral water flow, and the water can converge into these troughs or the valley. In the valley, you see you have forest, while at the top on the slope, you don't have forest. We need to consider that the redistribution, lateral redistribution of water over the landscape need to be considered. And the soil texture in this small area here, the climate is very similar, but you do see some places have forest, some don't, mostly because of soil texture. So with that, we did very intensive computation, and we found that these are the areas suitable for forest in China. And we consider a high resolution of existing forest map by Dr. Jing Ming Chen. And then we subtract this out and found that these areas, these like gray or light blue dots, And surprisingly, we found exactly 40 million hectares to plant. But later we did a bit more work, and so we found there are overlap with other types, it depending on the accuracy of this map. And so this number could be error by up to 20%. So we say 40 million hectares for oh, sorry, I should take out 2 zeros here. It's the unit conversion sometimes. And the say on average 3 tons of carbon per year. So this is kind of at about 10% only, not very much. Afforestation is not a big one. This is the example of afforestation program in China, near where I am currently working in Fujian. And so the second question, the potential of large increase potential is large in increasing the carbon density in China. Here are the two basically simple number. The average timber volume in China's forest is about 80 cubic meters per hectare, while the world average is much higher, 130 or so. And but these the conditions, climate conditions could be very different. I think China at least is the average climate condition of the world forest. And for example, in Fujian province, now the density is 90 cubic meters per hectare, while the climate condition there is excellent. Mean annual temperature is around 20 and precipitation is plenty. So there is a big room for improvement in carbon density. And how we want to improve, there is a lot of empirical study. I just pick up some of them. This is a set of comparison of forest management, how we can plant trees. And the Chinese fir is widely used plantation species. So a lot of time you rotate, when you grow to a certain age, you cut, then plant the same tree, the second generation, the third generation, but you found the carbon stock, both in plant and soil, decreases with time, in particular in plants. But there are other ways to avoid it, or you do mixed forest, and you could do rotation with other trees, other broadleaf trees, for example. Or you always keep the broadleaf trees, but only plant fir in between them and harvest fir only. So these are all effective measures. And also, in addition to plantation, you can have natural generation. And they also found that the secondary forest through natural generation will have higher carbon stock than the plantation. So this is plantation only, above ground soil, the total. And here, you can do better by managing the secondary growth. And on this one is showing that the biodiversity in the managed secondary growth is much better than the plantation. Leaf index is higher, biomass is higher at the earlier stage. At the later stage, the difference is smaller, but still quite significant. And where we also confirms the importance of age. And after the plantation, the carbon stock in soil increases a little, but it's stable. It does not get back to the original value. Once it's disturbed, it takes a long time to get back to the initial value. But the biomass is changing quite rapidly with stand age, in particular in these subtropical ecosystems. And now I am almost finished, and on the third one, I did not leave much time for this. And how about in the future prediction, we need to be concerned with atmospheric change, that's the CO2 and the nitrogen, and also the climate. And this is at the global scale, and the climate has changed a lot since early 80s. It's been exerting negative influence at global scale. Now, what we are saying by the other effect, the CO2 change and the CO2 fertilization in our work, and so on, many other work, indicates that is the main reason for the current terrestrial carbon sink. And this, of course, applies to China, applies to forest, and the global greening, at least area change, contribute significantly to the carbon sink. But this is also indirect effect of CO2 fertilization, for example. And in the last year, we published a controversial paper in Science that we claim that the CO2 fertilization effect has been decreasing with time. So there are various reasons that I'm not getting into it. And so this means that this positive effect is declining, although they will still remain positive. Of course, the climate change, the precipitation, temperature will also have other effects too, but it's not included in this talk. I'd like to finish it out by getting back to the social environmental system. And the first, as I say, we need the various options we can do to achieve carbon neutrality. We have to know the potential and the cost of each option. I just talk on one, on the forest ecosystem side. And from our estimate, the forest carbon sink by 2060 could reach to 10 to 20%, I think, of the current carbon emission. And the 20% could be, I think, would be the real upper limit. And we have to do a lot to achieve that measurement. So this is really means that the other options would be the main vehicle for us to get into the carbon neutrality. And in terms of the cost, so actually I get a lot of help to get these data. And here I summarize here, and the forest plantation and the cultivation is about 3,000 to 5,500 per hectare. And then we can achieve carbon density in the total life cycle. What is close to mature is about 100 tons of carbon per hectare, or in terms of CO2, it's 3.3 times more than that. And so then we divide this by that, and then we get 8 to 15 per ton of CO2. And remember that this is much lower than the social cost of carbon. In USA, it's $51, while in Canada it's 41. And so this means that although it is difficult, a lot of work to enhance the forest carbon sink, but it is still economically viable. But we really need to have economical mechanism like a carbon sink market. And this is need to be established. And in China now, the sink market is still, we have a few, but very, very cheap. It's only a few dollars per ton of CO2. Only a few dollars in China. So we need to establish this mechanism. And in terms of social cost of carbon, I think the guidelines is too small. This is a recent work by Kistra that Aceto estimate pegged at more than $200 per ton of CO2. So we hope we will put the right values for the carbon so we can stimulate the forest carbon sink. My summary, China's forest carbon sink is currently about 10% of China's total carbon emission, and this value will likely reduce due to forest aging, so we cannot take it for granted. Through afforestation and forest management, it is possible to double the forest carbon sink in China, and the financial mechanisms are needed to achieve this goal. To achieve carbon neutrality by 2060, China must avail all opportunities to reduce carbon emissions, including renewable energies, carbon capture, storage, and many other things. Thank you all. I stop here.
Thank you, Dr. Chen, for a wonderful and enlightening talk on the carbon and forestry and afforestation potential, forest management potential in China. So I have a couple of questions for you. The first one is from Dr. Seals. So have you incorporated the harvest and the storage of carbon in long-lived solid wood product, that is the harvested wood product? How much do you think that could affect your carbon sink scenarios for China?
Oh, yeah, excellent question. The carbon storage in the long-lived carbon product, like in furniture, 10 years, in the building can be 100 years and so on. And so this is not considered here. If this is considered, so we have to consider the disturbance. Okay, with the whole regime of disturbance is not considered here. If the disturbance is considered like fire disturbance, harvest, then the sink will be smaller. But we need to consider the storage into long-living products. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. The second question from Dr. Band is, can you comment on the co-benefits and the trade-offs of increased forest cover in China relative to flood or water supply risk? How do you incorporate these feedbacks with forest increase optimization?
Oh, yeah. I think there is only so much land that we can play with. And there is a trade-off, of course. For example, if you plant forest, you normally will take over the grassland. And then in the semi-arid regions, then the evaporation will increase. Then the runoff will be less. So that will be the trade-off. And but this is all come down to the value of carbon. If you want to do it or not, it comes down to the value of the carbon. If the value of the carbon is high, and we could do more, but if it's low, then we cannot do as much. So that kind of potential. But from our modeling work, the most remaining areas to be planted will be in southern China. So where the water is not a main issue. This is mostly it's a marginal land. Also, mostly it is soil degraded land. So we need to put a lot of effort to improve the soil conditions in these. And so you need investment. And only after the carbon market is fully established, we can afford economically to do this.
Very interesting. Okay, we have 3 more minutes, so I'll take another question or two. Here is a question from Dr. Kanggi Song himself. The social cost of carbon is an interesting concept. How is the cost estimated? Should it be changed with time?
Oh, That's a great question. Sorry, I did not have time to explain that, but now I will. The social cost of carbon is such, it's called the marginal cost, as estimated as the damage to our living environment by adding 1 ton of carbon or 1 ton of CO2 to the atmosphere. So this damage includes many things. First, of course, the induced warming, induced sometimes air pollution, and also then it will change the climate. Like is the drier place get drier, wetter place get wetter. So you will increase the flood, also increase the drought, but you also increase the agricultural management cost. And even some has estimated the extreme weather impact costing to lives. And also it estimates ocean acidification to the ocean ecosystems. And there are many things to include, but so this is why you see quite variability among the estimates. Whether or not it includes these or not, a lot of them, the estimate is quite rough.
Okay,
Yeah.
I just have just a 1 minute, and here is a quick question from Dr. Yulong Zhang. So, how is the quality of forest edge map based on the coarse remote sensing?
Oh, yeah. The map we mostly do is 500 meter. This is the notice data, but we also do 30-meter resolution. Now previously we do 50, now we do 30-meter resolution. A lot of my estimate is based on 30-meter resolution. And so in that you still have mixed pixels, but the effect of mixed pixel will be a lot smaller.